Hello and welcome to the Gospel Freedom Podcast. My name is Mitchell Parker. This is the first episode and I am so glad you've tuned in. Before we get going, let's take a look and see what's coming up in today's episode. Basically pulled it, I appealed it, they pulled it, I appealed it. What Facebook did was completely immoral and just completely unnecessary. The danger is that you can say something, someone can get offended, and it can just be taken down. That's fundamentally something as a Christian we should object to. I have people say that I should be nice to you because I didn't take a COVID-19 vaccine. So let's get right into this. What is the Metaverse all about? This particular Metaverse. Now, today I'm actually going to be talking about Facebook's Metaverse. Now, I say Facebook's, but now Facebook's changed its name to Meta because it wants to be all Meta. Meta's a really confusing concept to explain, but if you don't know what it means, it's basically a world within a world, basically, is what it's talking about. And specifically for Facebook, it's all about virtual reality. Now, my journey into the Metaverse is not actually about the Meta company and VR, but it's specifically going to be about Facebook and exactly what they have done in terms of restricting me on Facebook. So it's going to be all about how Facebook has restricted me. Now I'm going to tell a few stories, a few anecdotes, but most importantly get into the consequences of why this is dangerous, both socially, societally, and in terms of being a Christian, why this is so dangerous. Because as Christians, we need to be so aware of how our words are being used and how we communicate, and also how we relate to these specific companies. Because we use them so much, and we need to work out how it is best to make use of them. Now first today, I want to give a little bit of an anecdote. A few months ago, when the New South Wales lockdown was about in its halfway stage, in terms of the vaccinated. So about early on, about in July or August, I think it was, when the New South Wales lockdown was in full force and we had LGAs of concern. Now those LGAs of concern basically were arbitrary lines where different local government areas were given more restrictions because they were deemed to have a higher risk of transmitting the virus. Anyway, a curfew was implemented for those LGAs of concern. So I did a parody of that. I took the opening sequence from it, and I basically changed the clown, Pennywise the dancing clown, into COVID-19, the Delta variant. And so that was what I did, and I made a parody of that. And I put in some subtitles and changed the little boat that Georgie has, the little boy who meets Pennywise, or in this case, COVID-19. And I changed it into a surgical mask. And so we were seeing how Georgie was watching the face mask go down eventually into the drain and into the sewer. Now, I made that, and the film, which I looked up later, is actually made and produced by Warner Brothers. Now, they didn't have a problem with my parody. They didn't pull me up on Facebook for that. But when I made a new parody a little while ago, and this was in response to New South Wales and then other states eventually saying that you had to declare positive COVID-19 rapid antigen tests. It was mandatory to declare these tests. It was mandatory to declare these positive rapid antigen tests. And you'd be fined if you didn't. I made a joke saying, this is like the Gestapo, the SS. That was my parody. Now what did I use? I used a scene from Inglourious Bastards. Or a couple of scenes. A sequence from Inglourious Bastards. I cut out a little bit of it just because you don't want to have it too long on Facebook, a parody. And, this time I just put text up. I just put the subtitles. I didn't change any of the physical elements. So, I don't know why, but they didn't like it, and they basically pulled it. I appealed it, they pulled it, I appealed it, and then what Facebook did, which we'll get into in a little bit, was completely unethical, immoral, and just completely unnecessary. If you want to compare the two different parodies, they're not so different, really. Both times I put subtitles up, and both times I changed something with how it was made. So in the It parody, I put things over the faces, and I added in a little extra sound effect. In the Inglourious Bastards parody, I cut out a particular portion, and obviously I put the subtitles up. I didn't add any extra sound effects on that one. But the point is, if it was about sound, surely I would have been pulled up on the It parody, because I had an Inception sound effect as Pennywise came up out of the drain. And that's what I added in. And apart from that, and obviously the subtitles and, where I put a little object somewhere, nothing changed. But there was enough portion of the film to be virtually untouched. Except for, of course, the subtitles. Where they could have said, hey, we'll get a copyright strike. You're going to say you're not allowed to have this. But they didn't. Now, YouTube allowed me to do it. It said copyright, but YouTube allowed me to put it up. Now, that was on my personal account, but as you'll see, I've uploaded it on the Gospel Freedom YouTube channel, and I've made it better to the whatever edition I put on Facebook. I put like a couple of editions. Like sometimes I see a mistake on Facebook, and because you can, replace the video, that's what I did for Inglourious Bastards, because I realized there were a few mistakes. There's still a few mistakes in the one that's currently on my personal YouTube channel. The one that you'll see on my blog slash website is the final edition, the one that's on YouTube. Now, I want to get into what Facebook did. Now, initially, they just restricted it quite quickly, and then I appealed it and appealed it again. Now they didn't actually give me any reasons why. And then they gave me different forms to put in, and they still didn't give me reasons why, so I appealed and appealed. Now, eventually, it got to the point where they said they were going to restrict me for, I think, 2 days initially, and then they upped it to 3. Now, I could view Facebook, but I couldn't react, I couldn't comment, I couldn't, what else couldn't I do? Oh, and Messenger, and I couldn't use Messenger. This was a big thing, Messenger. And this was the completely unfair part. There's absolutely no way in which these restrictions were completely necessary and completely proportional. Now, if the issue was, hey, you posted something copyrighted, just remove the material. Just remove it, okay? You have a problem with it, Facebook, you remove it. But the problem was they didn't. They went and punished me. And so it was like I was doing a wrong thing. And the point is, they never actually gave me any reason why. Now, I already said it's fair use, and it is fair use to use a film or book or TV show or any other broadcast, any other media. It's fair use to parody that. That's what it is. So it cannot be that this was against copyright laws in both the US and Australia, because parodies in both is covered in both fair use laws. And YouTube allowed it. So it can't be anything to do with the laws or the like. It has to be Facebook's own policy. And that's the thing, is what is Facebook's policy? It's kind of really hard to tell what actually are the policies of these companies. But the thing is, they can't claim that I was breaking a law and they weren't allowing things. And that's one of the problems I have with Facebook, and with YouTube, and with Twitter. All these sites and platforms are basically being publishers. And the whole point about them, basically under US law, they're meant to be not publishers. They're meant to be spaces where you can post. Let me just check exactly what they're meant to be. Now, as I just said, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc. are not actually classified as publishers. Under US law, in a specific section of the Communications Act, Section 230, they're not classified as publishers. They're given an exemption. And they basically act as a town square, a public forum of debate. Now, there are some specific sub-clauses below that, which basically allow them to monitor within basic common understanding, basic, common values. Like, don't have explicit material online, or don't have videos of murder or other crimes on there. Now, it is under the law that these platforms are able to monitor and they're able to moderate, but they're not able to just arbitrarily do that. And that's the thing, is that it cannot be arbitrary. It has to be within these common sense rules, but ultimately, they don't need to do that. It's more where you're allowed to do so, because they're already protected by the law, that they cannot be, these platforms cannot be prosecuted for anything published on the platforms because, again, it's basically like a town square. And so therefore, people can't go on and sue these companies for what they allow on the platforms. That's a good thing. The problem is when these companies go ahead and they abuse their privilege to moderate. Because the ability to moderate is actually not given as a go ahead and do this, and you have to keep this in order to stay as a town square type environment. It's there because they want to have a clean environment. It's there because these platforms want to have free speech, but they also don't want to make it be the Wild West either. Basically, instead of this being permission, it's permission. You have been given permission to moderate. They've taken it to they must moderate in order to keep this status, and that's the problem. Is that social media companies and these platforms like YouTube have not actually stayed within their parameters as town square environments, and they've actually become the publishers. And that's the problem, is that social media companies and platforms need to decide what exactly they want to be. Do they want to be publishers, or do they want to be open forums of debate? Do they want to be a town square? Because if they want to be publishers, then they should be held liable for the content that goes on there. And if they don't want to be publishers and they do want to be a town square, then they have to lay off the excessive moderation. They have to lay off the moderation. They have to lay off this idea that they need to control everything. I mean, ultimately, they can't have it both ways. They have to pick which one they want. Do they want to be a publisher, or do they want to be a town square? That's ultimately what they have to choose between. But that is what brings me to my point, which is why do we engage with social media companies which actively censor what we post? And that's something that we need to think about as Christians. Do we want to be partaking in a business which allows for quite abhorrent content to actually be on there, but when you decide to parody something, you're not allowed to put it up there if a certain company says so? And that's the thing. These laws in the USA were meant to protect these companies from liability, so therefore users were able to have free speech, and that's not what they're doing. These companies are suppressing free speech. They're suppressing free expression, and it's not acceptable. Then they should not be doing this. So as Christians, what should we be doing? What we should be doing is what we've always done, which is to continue to share the gospel. And to share the gospel wherever we can, in person if preferable. Of course that's preferable. But online we should continue to do so. But we should fight back though. We should continue to fight back when organizations suppress free speech. They suppress what happens. We should be able to fight that. And we should fight that. It's not that we should be able to, it's that we should, and that's the right thing to do. It's just disappointing that it happens. It's not specifically a thing that happens to Christians. But this is a thing that we need to definitely push back upon and say this is not okay. Because it's not. Now on to the second example, where someone wrote a comment on a post that I'd made. I think I'd made the post. And it was in my group. The person made another comment on something I posted on my profile. Now I made this comment on both the posts when this person deleted their comment. I said, "A touch of cowardice I see," and then I tagged them, I tagged the person's name, and said, "You've deleted your comment." And this was flagged for bullying. Someone reported this, and it was written up as bullying. I appealed it once, I appealed it twice, I went to the special Facebook appeals board and appealed it again, and then I've appealed it another time. And currently my account is still limited. I can still comment and post. And also that my post will be put lower in the newsfeed. So apparently it won't be the top of the newsfeed if it's one of my personal profile posts. This is the danger here. The danger is that you can say something, someone can get offended, and it can just be taken down. That's fundamentally something as a Christian we should object to. We should object to this victim mentality, that because someone feels something, that we instantly have to say that that's a valid feeling. And it's something that I've felt personally, and maybe I'll go into another podcast and actually talk more about that specific issue that I'm talking about. But it's a long issue. It's a long story, not for today. But the point is, we cannot just look at claims and think, okay, someone's offended, therefore we should take down a post, we should say it's bullying. You need to look at the intention. What was my intention in saying that this person displayed cowardice? My intention was this person had commented and I'd replied to them and said, basically, whatever they said, I said they were wrong, or I'd asked them questions, and they just deleted it. This person deleted it. And so I'm saying that's cowardice. I'm saying, if you know that you're deleting something intentionally for the purposes of hiding from a particular debate or discussion, which was happening, there was a debate and a discussion going on, that's cowardice. If you delete it, it's cowardice. It's pretty plain and simple. And to say that's bullying is ridiculous. If you think that's bullying, you have a problem. I have people say that I should be nice to you because I didn't take a COVID-19 vaccine. Seriously. I mean, even though COVID-19 affects the elderly and the immunocompromised, the sick, the overweight, they think a relatively healthy-ish young man would be in hospital, in ICU. It's ridiculous. That's another topic. The whole brainwashing, mass formation psychosis / hypnosis. That's a whole other topic. This is where we need to see what bullying is. That's pretty much... I don't know if it's bullying, but it's certainly rude. I've had people say a lot worse things to me. But I don't shut them down. I don't say, hey, look, I should report that. Because whilst it's not nice, I defend the right for people to say things in free speech. People can't lie. Okay, that's wrong. Like, people should go say, hey, that's a lie. But if their opinion is I should be in ICU, and that's not a medical opinion, they're not saying, well, medically speaking, if you haven't taken a vaccine, you should definitely get the disease and be in ICU. It's not that kind of opinion. If it's just, I don't like you so much, you should be in ICU, then that's their view. Now, of course, they weren't saying that I should be there in terms of they wanted me there, necessarily. They may, but they believe that my stance against the immoral and unscientifically proven COVID-19 vaccines, because I stood up against that, they believe that I should, or that I would have been sick, and then I should be in there. And that's ridiculous. And also, the comments were made behind my back. I won't go too deep into it, but basically someone had posted that they got the vaccine. They put a little frame on their profile, and I put a sad face, and then someone asked if I put a sad face. They wrote a whole long thing. Someone replied, and I replied again, but eventually this person unfriended me. But then the other day, someone liked something on that post, and so that's how I saw that these people were discussing me again. And so I looked at it, and the initial post was months ago. It was back in July. So I didn't know why they were wondering how I was. Because if they really wanted to, they could have, but they didn't. Because they could message me or ask a number of my friends, but they didn't. So the point is that we just can't look at something and say, well, you're offended by it, therefore we should take it down. That's ridiculous. You need to look at the intention. And we can see the intention of what they wrote, this second incident about me. But again, I still don't believe you should take it down. Even if it is bullying or whatever, you could turn it off. This is the wonderful thing about online bullying, is you can just turn it off. Or e-bullying or whatever, if it's a text message or whatever. You can literally just say no. You can say, that's it, I'm going to turn it off. And that's what you need to do. If you are really that upset by what goes on, just honestly, just turn it off, delete it, block people. If you need to, do it. Now, I think blocking is cowardice. I think you should definitely stand up and not be a coward. But if people are bullying you, it's a very different story. That's if people are sending a whole lot of nasty things. You need to have a way to prevent that. But it's not nasty to make a comment like, that's cowardice. That's not nasty at all. So, my journey into the Metaverse, Facebook, has been, let's just say it's been a little interesting. And I don't like these restrictions, and that's why I'm doing the podcast, because I don't get restricted from the podcast. I don't get restricted on the podcast. No one's telling me what you can and can't say. And if Facebook wants to stop me from posting the podcast, that's fine. I've got a whole other few ways I can post it and then link it. That's the wonderful thing about having a podcast, is I can just do this. Same with the blog as well. I link to my blog, I write something that's good. But the podcast just helps me to actually verbalize these thoughts, and you can hear it as well. Now, just before I go, I just want to ask you, the audience, what has your experience been on Facebook? Into the Metaverse, as we should say. So that includes Instagram, I suppose. What have been your experiences? Have you been restricted arbitrarily? Now, if you want to send me a voice message, you can go to the show notes and there'll be a link to Anchor. If you're watching on YouTube, you could send me a comment, or you can also click the Anchor link, because although it's in the show notes in the podcast, on YouTube, it's also there. It's not a show notes, but it's in the description, because YouTube has descriptions. Also, you can comment, like I said, if you're on Facebook or Instagram, send me a message, whatever way you'd like to do it. But you can email me, you can contact me, whichever way. Just let me know what question you're answering. And the question, of course, is that. For Spotify, this is a Spotify exclusive. If you're listening on Spotify, many of you probably are. If you're listening on Spotify, guess what? You can go directly just below the show. There's a little box and there's a question and you can type straight in. Don't have to go anywhere. You just write it there. So that's pretty easy for you. It's an exclusive feature on Spotify and that goes straight to me. And that's pretty cool. I like that feature. Again, if you're not listening on Spotify, that's fine. You can comment everywhere else. And again, voice message. I like to hear your voice. Make sure to introduce yourself as well. If you're sending me a voice message, you introduce yourself and say, hey, who you are and your experience. And I'd like to play that. I'd like to play that. So anyway, thank you for listening to the first ever episode of the Gospel Freedom Podcast. It's been great to have your company. I hope you'll join me next time for more looking at the gospel and freedom and how we should live as Christians. But anyway, thank you for listening. Bye-bye, and God bless.